This is your
Awesome.
boy Larry on live on twitter.com. I don't use the slave name of X on my Twitter personality because
Yeah.
that's just really still a dumb name. Uh, but I haven't had an opportunity to have a good conversation with my friend Matt Crotts about this and that, and we both are into Greek mythology and into symbolism and the deeper meaning and purpose of things. And this was a great time to talk about the Odyssey. As things fade into the background, and as John Bernthal and Tom Holland and Zendaya are all in a much better movie,
Mm,
and it's a much better movie where I actually get to say, "Oh, now I see why Zendaya is considered a good actress because she's actually given something to do for a change.
mm,
She's
mhm.
generally given thankless work." But before Matt and I go too deep, we did a little pre-planning because we don't want to run this for too long. We came up with some basic first point declarations so we don't get slogged in some of the commentary slop. The works of Homer, in particular, in the broader Homeric canon, in reference to the Trojan Wars, have been remixed over millennia. And what we have as our core canon for Homer specifically has gone through at least three major revisions before it got to us. There was a traditional Ionian revision to it. There was an Athenian revision, and then there was later an Alexandrian revision. So there's
Mm.
layered subtext in what we have here, and that's okay. We're not going to complain that Nolan has been tampering with, a sacred text and doing something that the people who were alive when the sacred text came out did themselves. They remix things. It's fine. It's fine for the art. Next, the Homeric plays are very morally dense, and the story has lots of deep moral connections. And when you start moving things around, clipping things out, the whole thing kind of compresses. And do you well, I mean, you understand because you have a wife who probably has explained this to you, but I'm going to explain it to whoever's watching on Twitter and whoever will watch on Twitter in the future. Hector's a good guy in the Odyssey. Why is Hector a good guy in the Odyssey? He's a
Mm.
good guy in the Odyssey to teach the person living in the time of ancient Greece that if you go to war for your polis, the guy you're going to war against, he may be a good guy. He may be doing everything moral and upright, and that should govern your conduct towards him. Now, you're in a war. You're going to have to stab him with your spear. That's what you've been called to do. But you need to remember, he could be like Hector. And on the flip side, you have people like Achilles, who is the pinnacle of moral virtues like Cleos, desire for glory and honor. But it shows how the pursuit of virtue, when done to such an extreme, inevitably leads to vice. And this man who seeks glory and honor becomes a petulant child when things don't go his way. And then when the consequences of his own actions happen, he just becomes a brutal, savage monster. And that's what I mean when I say this is a morally dense text. Both the Iliad and the Odyssey, although they both communicate a different moral message, they're layers of morals. And Homer didn't like the Trojan War, and nor did most of the people writing around the same time when they were talking about this historic epoch in this great event that happened in this period. Nobody says, "Man, it was great that we went to war against the Trojans." Even though the Trojans did something in the stories that was pretty reprehensible. So it's
Mm.
dense, it's layered, and it has meaning. So I want you to open up with your frame of analysis for this movie.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me on. And honestly, like what my opener is going to be is going to it's going to echo a lot of the thoughts. Well, I won't say the same thing you said because I already agree with it, and you already said it better than I could. You already summarized it well. What I will say, what I'm bringing to the table that's distinct, because I've done like a 3 hour review and a 2 hour review already
Mhm.
of this darn thing, and a lot of the critical feedback I got was that I was too it was just two people agreeing the whole time, which is very
Well,
fair.
Well, we're going
So
to agree on a lot of stuff, but we're going to
mm,
disagree on some key points.
yeah, yeah, and I'm gonna do my best to because honestly, I have a tendency to not lean into the distinctions in the conversation as much. So I'm going to try to do my best to lean into what I think might be where we don't have the same view to get the conversation going so that we aren't just kumbayaing and which we
Exactly.
typically would. So my view is that the film best serves the audience that it has by being the sort of a psychological treatise on late American imperialism that it is. And if we got a quote unquote faithful retelling or something that was closer to the Homeric epic, because I would agree that this departs in many ways, not just on in some ways it agrees with what you just said in terms of broad themes, but there are character studies that are a serious feature of the Homeric epic and are not present here or have been remarkably uh, reevaluated in this
Mm.
adaptation. And I think that's for the best, not because I want to see the Homeric epic stripped of its not because I don't like the Homeric epic, but I just don't think it would appeal to Americans, frankly, to see a trickster running around and lying or something, or even seeing the gods depicted with in the manner that they have been um, in the Homeric epic itself and in uh, later ancient adaptations. I think people
Mm.
actually are best served by it being a analogy for different aspects of one's psyche for today, for this particular the telling that Nolan wanted to do. He set up a thesis, and then he decided to test that thesis over 3 hours and 5 minutes, and given the what he set out to do, I think he did a very good job of it. However, so that's like part 1, is that
Mm.
we actually are better served by it being a thinly veiled analogy for our current day. And part 2 of what I'm bringing is that almost none of what I just said matters because when a film, captures the commentary community as much as this one does, and we get about 1 a year,
Mm.
usually a blockbuster Hollywood, like a summer flick will do
I
this.
mean, Nolan was involved in the part of that last year too, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we got
Or
this.
no, it was whenever Oppenheimer was. Oppenheimer wasn't last year. It was like
Yeah,
three
it might have been 2 years.
years, something like that.
Yeah, or and yeah, with Barbenheimer, and particularly with Barbie, at some point, you escape the you reach an escape velocity where the film we it becomes less important to even like we stop even talking about the film as a film and we start talking about the commentary of the film because that's where the lasting legacy of the film is going to reside is in who who said what about the film and
Oh
how,
yeah,
you
oh yeah.
know? And so the everything I just said doesn't line up with what I think most people are saying about it from the Emily Wilson, the progressive, the latest translator of Homer's Odyssey, and Iliad too, I think, to, right wing commentary folks. They're doing the muscular handshake over how this doesn't have enough have enough sex, for instance, in it. Once you get to that point, it's almost like the more interesting and maybe the more important discussion is to say like just how people are discussing the film, because yeah, what Nolan says about it, what his intentions were, I think all of those things are valid and interesting. but that's not gonna be how people remember it. Just same as we
Yeah.
don't remember Barbie for what the director slash writer said about it. We remember um, Ryan Gosling, being understood to be like he became like an avatar for the sort of I don't know, men's advocacy, you know, kind of commentary that had been uh, growing in interest and appeal over the last maybe decade or so. Like
Mm.
that actually became that would have to be a necessary footnote now to describing what the movie Barbie actually is. Whereas what the director said about it is probably I would think of that as much more optional now in
No, I
that
think
regard. So those are my
I
2
think the
points.
I think both in the case of Barbie as well as the Odyssey, what the director said and what the text of their work says is fundamentally different. So,
Yeah, sure.
what how my perspective has evolved and what we're going to talk about from my side is Nolan has a meta story. He's talking about the decline of the post-liberal, or as we will call for the people on the internet, the boomer era, and he keeps retelling slight different variations of the story about boomerism and the decline
Mm,
through a postmodern secular psychotherapeutic lens. And the problem is those features come into conflict with the storytelling technology of Homer in the Homeric Odyssey. So when things are clashing, it's because the ideas of Nolan and the structural ideas of Homer, they don't work together. They don't fit like a glove.
mm.
Because I mean, we're gonna tell you a tale of a man, a great man. That's a thing that Christopher Nolan likes to tell the tale of. And the greatness of the man has evolved from Memento and his early works through Batman, through The Prestige, through Inception, through Tenet. The exception that proves the rule is the movie Dunkirk, because it's the founding parent mythology of
Mm,
boomer culture. It's sincere, it's authentic, and it's a patriotic British story. Then we also have Interstellar, where again it's about a great man who's a science man, and he's the only scientist who's trying to find a way off planet Earth because planet Earth is dying. This is a recurring theme in Oppenheimer. Troubled man who's the only man who can invent the bomb to stop the war with the Nazis. And through this whole line of tradition, we get to Odysseus, who is the most current, but also the most in the past of all of Nolan's troubled men. And all these troubled men have a dark sin of their past, which haunts them. Again, Dunkirk being the exception, because it's again about the boomer liberal order. World War II was when it was challenged. It was the hard times making strong men. And all of his stories are about strong men making weaker times. And
mm.
the Odyssey is kind of weak times leading to weak men and weak times leading to bad times. And there is what, at least in the beginning, in a lot of the later movies, feels like a divine aid. But the divine aid is us. There weren't any aliens in Interstellar. It was Matthew McConaughey in a Tesseract.
Yeah,
There wasn't an organization in Tenet. There was just the thing that the protagonist started himself. There wasn't really an answer in the dream plane for Leonardo DiCaprio's character. It was humans finding the answers to their own problems, which again
yeah,
fits the neoliberal thesis that I have here. And
that's fair.
there's never a strong cathartic resolution because it's psychotherapy. Your catharsis is about the journey and the story you tell to your therapist, which is kind of what the Nolan storytelling meta is. And that doesn't interface well with the Odyssey.
Mm. Okay.
So that's my opening frame of argument here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
You,
what if it could? What if it could interface with the adaptation of the Odyssey?
well, I mean, the adaptation is the meta story, and the problem is the meta story is wearing Odyssey like a skin. And
Hmm.
oh, hold up, Joe's commenting on Twitter. Americans love Coyote and the Roadrunner. Yeah, America likes tricksters. It's true. We've liked tricksters in the past. That's absolutely true. But
Mm.
but back to where we're at with the Odyssey for a moment,
I
because
yeah. I don't think we like liars though,
I
and
mean, there's a whole genre of tall tale telling folk heroes in American
that well,
culture.
that's not why. How about we just finished hosting the World Cup? I
Hmm.
mean, how
Hmm.
much do Americans enjoy, seeing people fake an injury to get a red card, you
I
know?
mean, I've seen basketball players fake better,
Yeah. Well, yeah,
and
and we don't typically abide that, even if most of the world does, you know?
yeah.
That's one of the reasons why we don't like, the world's most popular sport is because one of the strategies for playing it is to be Odyssean.
I mean,
Sorry, but
I
I don't
can
wanna
go
I don't
with
wanna take
that.
us
I can
off.
go with that.
I
No,
know.
no, no, no,
I
no.
did swerve.
That's a little bit of a swerve here, but I would go with what you were talking about with the story we need, because here's the thing: Odysseus feels sad in this movie. He's sad, emo dad, about the war.
Yeah.
It's a war. The movie doesn't do a good job of expressing it. He didn't want to fight in. The movie doesn't express the reason he was forced to fight in the war. And the trick, the trick that he feels is the technology that is destructive and has ended the world, which is another recurring Nolan motif. It's like the bomb in Japan, and we need Agamemnon to say, "Get this man away from me. I can't abide his weepiness," because the horse saved lives, saved Trojan lives too, because a war of attrition would kill more people. Just it'd be over a longer frame of time. So this
Mm.
is, and it came out in that Chinese interview where no one feels that greatness must be apologized for, again, except for Dunkirk, because he needs the founding parental value myth.
Well, and I'll give you I'll even, underscore something and agree with you in a certain respect. I think one of the reasons why Dunkirk works and continues to be even a lasting I mean, Nolan's British and
Mhm.
the the battle, the events of Dunkirk are known better. I mean, until this movie, they were known much more in the UK than in America, but, the idea of turning a strategic the fallout of a, strategic loss and effectively, you know, England's last, offensive contribution to the war before they, on paper lost it. To turn that into a moral victory, that might actually work with, um, the boomer mythology, maybe even
Yeah,
more than we give it credit for, you know?
because World War II, that's the just war, and Nolan is never comfortable with war, even though he views it as one of his recurring human motifs. And you shouldn't be comfortable with war. A person who's comfortable with war is a person you should be uncomfortable with.
Yeah,
And that Homer isn't comfortable with that either. So that's not like our modern sensibilities being put in here.
yeah.
But
Odysseus in Homer doesn't want to go to
no,
war.
no. Even Achilles didn't want to be involved. And Achilles is all about glory and war.
Yeah,
They had to twist his arm to get him in. It's because everybody knew Agamemnon was using it as a power play. But we'll get to the power play part in a moment. We'll get to that in a moment. So Odysseus is sad about a war, but the war was, of course, not caused by Odysseus. It was caused by the alliance, of which Odysseus created as a way to maintain peace and order among the Greek chieftains, which is not in this movie. We can't bring in too much of the backstory lore into this movie. But beyond that, it is the fault of Paris. But the fault of Paris is interesting because it speaks to a deeper moral and spiritual level than this movie is going to speak to. Because Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite are not just Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite. It's civilization, tradition, and libidinous desire. So,
Mm,
what is a young man going to choose of those three? Libidinous desire. And a young man choosing libidinous desire serves the ends of strife and chaos. So, by making this emo sad dad the movie, we're losing out on the deeper moral perspective. But again, emo sad dad is the boomer mythology that no one wants to consistently use.
okay. Okay. Um, would you unpack that just a bit more? Because I want to make
Sure,
sure, because I think I'm missing, I want to make sure that lands rock solid.
sure. So all of Nolan's heroes are troubled. So anything that doesn't serve that story end is cut. But what I'm saying, using Paris judging the apple for the three goddesses, he's not just
Yeah.
faced with three goddesses who are, beautiful, powerful, can give him whatever he wants. Athena's the goddess of civilization, although not technically in a strict term, but she's the wisdom, the knowledge, using knowledge to defend the polis. She's civilization. She's
Yeah, I
also
get you.
crafts. Hera is tradition. She's the goddess of the household, the mother, the queen, and Aphrodite is libidinous desire. We use the word love, but that's not really appropriate in the way the Greeks understood it.
Yeah.
So, what does the young man choose? He chooses libidinous desire. And that's as true for Homer's era as it is for our own.
Yeah. That's good.
And
Hmm.
that serves
Okay.
strife, which is the golden apple and Eris.
Hmm. Yep.
And your point was no one tells the story we need today. That is a story I feel we need today, much like the Helen we see in Homer's work, who people died because of her. Her love, Paris, died because of her. And she was lifted from the madness that the goddess of love put her under. And in the ruin of her life, the only person who could understand her pain was her husband, who had lost his brother, had led countless men to their doom, and their marriage was reforged from that. That's where I'm
Okay.
struggling with your side. It's like, I think no one is taking away things we need to tell the story he is the artist wants to tell, which is his right, because he's an artist that makes billions of dollars.
Well, that's a pretty complex argument. Okay. Well, can I try to echo that to make sure that
Absolutely,
I'm
absolutely, absolutely.
so you're saying um uh it would be better to explore if you're gonna pick one of three goddesses to explore a projection of the male psyche for 2026 and
The
the
young male psyche,
mm,
specifically.
yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah. The young male psyche for 2026 and have that be a psychological exploration of his uh I suppose his well just like Athena was in this movie his sins, which he is fragmented over and therefore not seeing in a Jungian sense. He hasn't reconciled with that particular shadow self that aspect, and if you need to see that worked back and reintegrated over the course of a story, that you
Well,
would do that
it's
with
about the
Aphrodite
morals.
rather than Athena.
Well, I mean, it's about the moral aspect for Paris as the character, but Paris is a stand-in for young men, and
Yeah.
also Athena, as she's used in this movie. That's a whole other thing. Which what's weird is I don't think that's going to be something we're even going to talk that much about because there's even more interesting things to dig into in the architecture of this, and also there is a subtext about this movie about migrants and about illegal immigrants and about how civil disruptions create chaos, which is something that is true to our time. And what is Nolan's big argument? Well, if you defend yourself, you have to go into exile. So Nolan is making a argument out of the camp of the saints when talking about this big controversial thing that people all over the world are experiencing. Spain is getting a ramp of illegal immigrants from their territory in North Africa. And that's a complicated colonial issue, but the Spanish government is basically saying, what can we do? And that's not a that's not the choice we need. We need to be challenged. So is the challenge that we just accept the suitors eating us out of house and home? Or do we do what Odysseus did? Put him to the sword.
You know, well, I mean, just like when you think of, I don't know. I thought it was a delightful. People have been mentioning the Christianization that whole. You know,
which which thanks to someone in China, no one's like, no, no, I mean, I didn't really do that. Well,
yeah. Well, how about like I mean, just like this is not something I think has been mentioned on either of our feeds yet. Or at least I haven't said it. I don't think you've said it. But you could think of King David being told like you're not going to build. You've been a man of
of
bloodshed.
blood. Yeah.
So it's your son who's going to get to build the temple. He's going to be a man of peace who builds the home, and you're going to uh he, you made that that peace possible, but um you can't
Yeah.
you can't build from that. That's going to have to go to your son Solomon, which I thought was very artfully echoed in this particular retelling.
I mean,
And and and
it's the
and
Joyce
I want
ending
to
is what
ask
I
you, like,
hear.
because I think you're doing some great stuff with the boomerism mythology, but unlike Oppenheimer from 2 years ago, where the question was asked, which Nolan has been asking since Memento, as you said. The question was asked, like, can you go home again? Is it possible to go home? And Oppenheimer once again just asked that, and the implication was no. This time, uh, th- it sounds like you can go home, and maybe
Well,
you have to go into exile after, but
well,
it was a
it's a different home in this movie. It's the psychological sense of home. It's
yeah,
you're
but it
going
was
back
more
to the woman you love after you feel you're worthy of going back to her, which is
yeah.
something Nolan has been chewing on going back to Inception.
Yes, yes, but even Inception was like a tragedy, like you could only
Yeah.
go home to a woman that you captured in a mental prison, maybe, like this, but this time, because it feels like, and I mentioned this um in a previous one. I won't like just repeat stuff I've brought up before, but like I'm thinking about how Nolan did. I mean, he wasn't told to make this movie. I'm assuming he chose it.
No, no, no one's
Yeah,
at this point in his career where I made the joke on Twitter to somebody. I said, if no one said, I want to make a Gumby movie, the studio would hand him the money he would
yeah.
need and hand him the rights to Gumby. No questions asked.
Yeah, which means you can trust that he wasn't frustrated by the end of Homer's version of the Odyssey.
Well, I mean,
But
Homer's version of the Odyssey, which he's told some in my opinion,
Okay, that's
fits
fair.
about
Yeah, probably.
is it's not telling his story.
Yeah. Well, I guess like all that to say, he told the story he wanted to tell, and the story he told us, I think, advances the boomer mythology, advances it significantly. So now we're not just uh, lamenting greatness or feeling um, learning to live with the guilt of winning. Now we're saying, if this is a continuation of boomer mythology, now we're saying it might be time to give the reins to the next generation, right? Which I
Yes,
think is really interesting.
but also trying to keep them from getting their hands in the blood, which I don't think
Uh,
is a message that serves people because you have to work. You have to work to eat.
mm,
So
okay, okay.
again, I think Nolan's secular psychiatric framing doesn't serve the audience. Also, let's get to the fact that there's been a lot of commentary about it being a religious text and his misuse of Xenia, because again, Xenia is very specific cultural norm that there are several different versions of it, and he decided to equate it to the golden rule.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've been to different cultural households. When you go into certain households of the culture, you have to eat something. Otherwise, you're being hospitable, being impolite. That
Yeah.
causes social disorder. So
Mhm.
the suitors uh, were violating the rules. And within the text of Homer's work, the reason that they couldn't kick the suitors out is because they were playing the game of politics. And they
Mhm.
were putting Penelope and Telemachus in a position where they couldn't rally support against them. And where other allies, like King Menelaus, he couldn't rightly send a bunch of Spartans over to Ithaca to clean up this mess for his friend's son, which he would want to do. But that doesn't serve Nolan's story. It would be much more nuanced and much more interesting, and it would turn the whole thing into a miniseries. That's why most movies about the Odyssey focus on the Odyssey itself or on Odysseus coming to rain down righteous judgment on the suitors. Because if you try to do both, you realize how the two plots kind of undermine each other.
Okay. Okay. See, this is another good, super interesting point you're making. Do you care to flesh this out even more?
Sure, sure. The plot with the suitors is basically these people are eating Odysseus out of house and home. He's
Yeah.
away. His son doesn't have the capability of removing them. And then the righteous avenger returns from the seas. He has to use deception, cunning, intelligence to get close enough to put an end to it.
Yeah.
And the Odyssey itself proper is a man with a desire to get home, faced with a physical manifestation of the spiritual temptations of the journey.
Yeah.
And the man resisting those temptations, which, if you view it as a secular person, you think, oh, it's just weird monster things. No, these monsters each represent something that is spiritual, moral, cultural, and emotional.
Hmm.
So if you link those two stories together, you shortchange one or the other, or as Nolan did, you shortchange both.
Wait, you think sorry, I gotta make sure I'm keeping up with you on this. Do you think the monsters represent psychological, or
Yes,
moral in
yes,
Nolan's version?
not Nolan's version.
Not in Nolan's version. Okay.
They represent obstacles. In my
Mm,
opinion, Nolan's text is they are obstacles that whittle Odysseus down until he reaches rock bottom, which is apparently in the bottom of the pool of heroin, and then he climbs out. And only then can he be the man he needs to be.
Yeah. He has to learn to be a nobody so that he can actually be himself and be the husband he needs to be and the father, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
But as is typical for Nolan, we don't get to see that interiority about his relationship with his wife or his child because why do anything with emotions, right?
Yeah, and that's very fair. He's been frequently people forbiddy like this isn't even a political point. Like everybody seems to have a consensus view, and I think it's very valid that he's not great about telling emotional stories, particularly between men and women.
Even though that's a crux of almost all of his stories.
Yeah, it looks like it was supposed to be there, and then somehow you miss it for basically all of his movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a problem I have with his storytelling here. And again, it's
Mhm. That's fair.
the story of the Odyssey itself is mostly told from Odysseus recounting this at a dinner party, and people are pondering whether this is all BS because even the audience within Homer's narrative realizes that Odysseus is probably an unreliable narrator,
Yeah.
but he's also a descendant of several other Greek trickster heroes, including one that was famously played by Bruce Campbell in Xena Warrior Princess.
Hmm.
So that's one of my other contentions here is that Nolan's storytelling aesthetics conflict with the storytelling technology that Homer pioneered.
That's fair. I think I would concede you that. Yeah. Well, on those points that you brought up. Yeah. He's not great. Those are not um he has particular strengths and he has particular weaknesses. And we could trace about across 6 or 8 movies now at this point.
Yeah,
And um
like his thing with the
you know,
sound mixing. The sound mixing is bad,
you
and
think
that
so? Yeah.
shows. Yeah, especially the opening with Travis Scott, who was terrible casting because he's a bad rapper. If you've watched the WWE, he's not a good actor either.
Yeah.
But you want that voice, especially since you're using the bard as a bookend, to be clear. His voice to carry and control the room, but it's just not there. He doesn't really tell the composers what they're writing music for, so the music is really dissonant. So the music can't pull you into the narrative and into the suspension of disbelief. And he doesn't tell the actors what to do. Famously, Robert Pattinson asked him about that, and he said, "Well, that's your department. It's not my department." Also,
Amazing.
Robert Pattinson was the only one who wanted to read the script before he agreed to do the movie.
It's funny.
And the only person who probably read Homer before this movie was John Leguizamo because he was a classics major in college, apparently.
Yeah. That's
So
funny.
their performances weren't really informed by the text; they were just informed by what they felt no one wanted them to do in the script, and that doesn't really pull you in. And then it goes to Nolan's visuals, and there were several shots that were very technically skilled. Craftsmanship was very good, but the Trojans' armor, it was white minimalist. The Greek armor, black minimalist. It's not really engaging. It doesn't cut a swath through the prior images of the Odyssey or sword and sandal movies for generations. It's just meh. Everything's dark and not colorful, but it's about depression. So I mean, guess that fits with the themes, but all the
Yeah.
movies are washed out. So that doesn't make it visually distinct. So it it's technically genius. Um, it uses the IMAX cameras.
It's technically genius. Okay.
Well, no, I mean from a technical standpoint, the film work was genius, but the story's mid at best. The performances are wasted, or actors are not given enough to do anything interesting. Oppenheimer had much better performances, but it was based off of real people in a real time, and Nolan's weird perspective on Oppenheimer. And he even admits that Oppenheimer influenced how he saw Odysseus.
Yeah. 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 Well, I mean, like you mentioned, it's not a colorful. He doesn't spend much of this film, uh, if anything, uh, rewarding you. He's not tipping his hat to the heritage of sword and sandal films,
No.
uh, and I think that does speak to the intentional decisions. Some of the things that you brought up are just weaknesses that he might. They frankly they might be blind spots to the sort of stories that he tells. But the lack of color, um, that could be a blind spot because that's typical. His movies are not known for color, but I think that it actually is a strength, of let's just say this: it reinforces the thesis of this film that the movie is about depression, like you mentioned. So it's more like it's a creative decision, or maybe it's not terribly creative because it's the same decision he's made since Black and White Memento, but
Yeah.
it does dovetail with the themes of this particular film. Um,
And
yeah.
that's the let's talk about Athena, because it's significant enough. Um they use the gods wrong in this movie. Not just Athena. When they go into
Mm.
Zeus's temple in Ithaca, there's Hera there. They're doing uh, rites to Demeter there. You don't see a statue of Zeus. They say to bring the horse to the temple of Athena, which is not correct because Athena wasn't a patron god of the city. That'd be Apollo, and the horse was a patron. Was a part of the portfolio of Poseidon.
She's central in Virgil's version. I don't remember that in the Iliad, but I've been told that there's the desecration of a at least the shrine. Maybe it's not the central
Sure,
temple, but it is a story element in later versions.
sure, but
But
the point is,
yeah.
Nolan doesn't use the gods right because he doesn't believe in the gods. He doesn't really believe in the supernatural. We have the monsters, but the monsters being recounted from a guy who's coming off of heroin. So there's no sublime. There may not even be the monstrous here other than the suitors themselves.
Mm.
And Athena, spoiler if you haven't seen this movie. And if you haven't seen this movie, why are you watching my Twitter feed? It's a really weird choice. It's a really weird choice that you've made if you've had it spoiled for you. Athena's a PTSD ghost, and he relies on the prejudice we in our era have of the ancients, where they're like saying, "Oh, well, the gods, people just assume storms were gods." Well, no, the ancient Greeks had a much more complicated perspective on gods, just like we did. Not everybody agreed on the canon of gods that we understand of theirs, which also is a byproduct of many revisions and many local tales being sanded down to fit context in Alexandria and Rome. So there's no gods in this movie. So the use of a moral diktat as your central plot device doesn't work if there isn't a sense that the gods and the religion are a real thing to the characters in the movie.
Hmm. Well, I mean, okay. Well, I kind of want to push back on that a bit. Like, I mean, so I would agree with what you're saying his intentions are with the gods, what his beliefs are projected through this story,
because
and how
he
he.
said that he said that outright in interviews.
Oh, did he? Oh, funny.
Yeah, Nolan said outright in interviews, it's like they would see the god in the storm and this and that and the other thing. He said
Yeah. Well, some Greeks, some classical Greeks, and that would be hundreds of years after Homer, but some classical Greeks did say, really, really, if you're reading gods in this story, they're just analogies for natural forces. So there were
yeah,
divided opinions,
and the gods are
2,500 years ago about that.
and the
Yeah.
gods are a projection of what's true onto the spectrum of the infinite. Zeus
Mm,
is the personification
well
of
said.
kingship. Um, Ares is a personification of violence for the state's benefit. He's not just a god of war, he's a god of murder. He's also the god of the police. He's the libidinous violence of men being deployed, which is why he hooked up with Aphrodite, who's the libidinous aspects of womanhood. They
Yeah,
go together, toxic relationship. We all know those people.
yeah.
So we lose that aspect when you cut the gods out, but you can cut the gods out if at least the Greeks seem like pious religious people. And the only thing pious and religious seems to be Zeus's law, which for that one scene where we have two non-Greek actors playing Greek characters talking to a Greek actor telling him that they're Greek, which which is a really weird scene. I
Oh,
feel
come
very
on.
uncomfortable with that.
I loved that. Why didn't you? I mean, you know what he's doing there. The irony is absolutely intentional,
Well,
and you
I
didn't you
think
didn't
it
appreciate that?
it's the secular thing, and I don't like that because I don't believe he's doing stunt casting for the normal stunt casting reasons. But that move there makes you feel kind of like it was a little bit, and like going, "Come on, man, you're a better
But
director
but
than that."
what was his message in doing that? What was he messaging to our audiences?
Well, it's all about man's inhumanity to man, and that
Yeah.
inhumanity to man has come from a disruption of social norms. Of course, we don't see why these villagers didn't give Odysseus's people what was allowed under the social norms. We also don't see whether Odysseus viewed this as just like, I got to raid and pillage to get stuff for my boat. We don't see that because, again, it's all flat and smooth.
Okay. Okay. In my
But
in my view of that, the
mhm,
scene of uh racially diverse um Greeks talking to the only person who speaks something other than American English in this movie, and he's speaking Greek, to tell him, "No, we're Greeks from Ithaca. We're not the sea people." As he's burning this Greek man's village, um, I thought it was especially poignant, and I thought it was a very carefully composed uh, critique of 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 late empire from an American, particularly American perspective. I thought it was very artfully composed, and I think it was respectful in an adaptive style. It was respectful of the Homeric
I mean,
tragedy.
yes, but my problem is, again, back to your original lens for looking at this. That's not the story we need to hear because we've been hearing that story since the 70s.
Okay, okay.
It's not new, it's not fresh. None of his takes were new or
Mm.
fresh particularly. And
Well, I
like
mean, Gen X might be the new boomers. I don't know because what do you think? I mean, we just every time we get a new war, we get a new. It becomes. Um, I mean, we talk about post-war consensus. I don't know. I think of the Vietnam War as having more of a casting more of a shadow over
Oh, yeah,
our
this
culture
movie.
than
And
World War
also this
II.
movie.
Yeah,
It's
even if
very
we have
Vietnam.
yeah, yeah, and we might remember World War II for its, like, we get our cultural memes, I guess, about
Mhm.
heroes and villains from World War II, but we get our trauma, I think, very, very, distinctly from Vietnam, and then we have that repeated in, you know, the Gulf War.
Mhm.
We get 20 years in, 20 years. Have you heard that
In
term
the in
before
the
in
toilet
Afghanistan, in
in the
Iraq?
toilet. Yeah,
Ex Yeah, so, like, if that has to be echoed again, I think that means it's because it's still relevant. I don't know. I
but
I almost
but
think the boomer mythology is still I hate that you're getting me to say this, but I think the boomer mythology is still relevant on those key aspects
right, right, but
of empire.
let's talk a bit about Afghanistan as an example from the boomer mythology standpoint. We followed our own mythology, our own boomerism, and we didn't pay attention to the fact that in Afghanistan, it's tribal customs, tribal systems.
Yeah.
You're gonna hire a guy who's going to hire people from his tribe, whether they're there or not. They're gonna pad things out. The only way for you to constitute a new Afghanistan state is a heavy duty occupation, which the ghosts of boomer mythology past say, well, we can't do that because it didn't work in Vietnam. But it worked
Yeah.
in Korea, it worked in Japan, it worked in Germany.
Yeah.
Now, you can make an argument that it worked in those countries because of certain cultural and historical forces, but if you say no, it won't work because of that one time, then then you're like Odysseus in this movie. You're a sad boy who can't get over being sad about a war that needed to happen.
That's interesting. That's interesting angle. So you think we try like we could have actually tried to do this differently in Afghanistan, and we
I
because of Vietnam we never tried, so we were doomed to fail.
and also Bush and then Obama were all on the internationalist perspective. It has to be UN approved. It has to fit the global internationalist neoliberal framing. That wasn't going to work. The same thing in
Mm.
Iraq. In Iraq, we could have said, listen, we're going to impose a parliament on you. We're going to impose these new political systems. We're going to explain to you how they work, like we did to Japan, albeit they had certain institutions that we were able to sort of model into that. But again, we followed the UN internationalist norm. And now we look at what's happening in Iran. We can't assert ourselves because the boomer mythology has led us to not making good, defensive, strong, masculine warrior ethos decisions. So we're basically shooting our missiles until we run out, and then we wave our hands and try to get a peace treaty.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Okay.
that's
Yeah.
that's the thing. If we're telling a story we need to hear, then if you want to tell that, you need to be challenging. You need to say, listen, the war in Troy was bad, but they stole a dude's wife. I mean, yes, Paris kind of lost his mind. She kind of lost her mind, but if a man could just steal a man's wife like that, everything's going to fall apart. But if you tell that story, you can't tell the story no one wants to tell you, which is a very safe, very British class system oriented view on hierarchy and labor and public order. It's the boomer neoliberal British mindset, which is failing in real time now.
Mm.
But Nolan doesn't want to challenge that. And this would have been a perfect vehicle to challenge that. I mean, the maids who were traitors and the other servants that were traitors, they
Yeah.
got killed in the Odyssey, and that would be very off putting and challenging. But in a story that focuses on the restoration of the family and civic values against, people eroding it from the inside, that could have been a really climactic part of the movie. but not a climactic movie made by Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. I'm happy to celebrate an incremental win when we get when we get the boomer archetype advancing and deciding that voluntarily that's going to tell a next chapter of the story that's not just going to be mourning its own victories.
Yeah,
You know, and I I just saw something that was more um reconciliatory and like anticipating a happy future where they're not making all the decisions. And that felt like an advancing of the narrative that you don't get in
but
Oppenheimer
you
or
but you
previous.
don't see Telemachus learn to become a man. They're just like, good luck, kid. Hope it works out for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it might not be time. It might not, from Nolan's perspective, he might not know what that looks like. Uh,
Because
but
we
he
lose
knows
that
more of what that
history.
looks like than he did 2 years ago with Oppenheimer, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
Which is good. I see that as, you know, um, it's it just feels like we're discovering maybe perhaps rival um alternatives, but we're finding out what we want to say next now because we're realizing that you can't just generationally traumatize people forever about whether it's Vietnam, who no one, hardly anyone lives, is alive to remember, and it's certainly even more so the case with World War II. You can't generationally traumatize everyone with the same post-war trauma
And
if they didn't live through it and their parents didn't either. So you're gonna have to find some way to make timeless truths relevant that don't just echo a consensus that was based on what people you know it was a consensus built because people had lived through it.
and
So this feels like an incremental shift towards saying, well, we got to say something next, and that something is going to have to be carried by the Telemachuses of the world. They will not be carried by the Odysseus's and the Penelopes.
yeah, and we're old enough. We knew people when they were still vital elders who lived through World War II. I knew and talked extensively to a Pearl Harbor survivor.
Yeah,
I was old enough where I could talk to some of the last surviving World War One people.
that's cool.
All this cultural touchstone stuff is going to be gone, and there's
Yeah,
nothing
I miss
to
them, but
replace that.
yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
So we bit at this apple for about an hour. So how does this rate with the other bits of the Odyssey discourse that you have been chewing on?
Yeah, but it's this was a fantastic conversation. Yeah,
And I
I was
appreciate the fact you told me to limit it to an hour because we were able to get really fucking focused.
yeah, which is great, and also, yeah, and somehow I got a cold. Picked up, well, I know how because I was seeing my niece and nephew earlier this week, and they gave it
Children
to
are
me.
plague
Yeah,
bearers. That is a fact. It is a fact.
and this has been great, honestly, also because I think we needed, because we wanted to do this conversation earlier, and I was stuck with travel. This actually gives us a fresh amount of distance, I think, to hit it,
And, and also
now that the dust
Spider-Man.
is somewhat settled. Yeah,
Yeah, and Spider-Man is taking over the discourse
finally,
and and sweeping through, and Spider-Man is going to make a ludicrous amount of money.
it is.
And the
Yeah,
poor Marvel Cinematic Universe, they're not going to be able to follow up on Spider-Man because Avengers Doomsday looks like it's a giant mess.
yeah, just wild. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And, like, I think we both agree, like, it's it's nice to, for the conversation about summer movies. It seems to be it's finally moving on to a movie that seems like most people enjoyed, which
Yeah.
is good. With
And
actors who are talented in themselves, but are finally given a chance to do to do their craft more than Nolan gave them a chance to do, perhaps, particularly with Zendaya. But is what it
yeah,
is.
and
Yeah.
the reason Zendaya was able to do more in Spider-Man apparently is Tom Holland put his foot down and said, "Listen, I'm the franchise here. We're going to need to set some ground rules."
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you everybody who watched, and we may be doing some more of these in the future. My streaming situation may be getting restructured because lost access to some of the cool features I had when StreamYards was a pain in the behind. Lost members of the show that I've been carrying on my back while the original host has had to work multiple jobs because he wants to keep his children fed and clothed, and God bless him for that. So we, I may be doing more things like this to try to build up a streaming audience to kind of get something going
Nice.
because maybe a change of direction.
Yeah. I look forward to seeing you streaming more, and I look forward to maybe being a guest on future episodes. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And then we're going to hit the end stream button. Doot.